Hello, and welcome to today's program. I'm Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States. Perhaps my name isn't as well known as some of the other presidents, but my life has been deeply intertwined with the history of this country. My story is full of controversy, challenges, and pivotal moments, and today, I'll take you through my life, showing you how a poor carpenter like me found himself in the highest office in the land that I was born in 1808 in Raleigh, North Carolina, into a family of poverty. My father passed away when I was very young, and my mother struggled to raise me on her own. Looking back, my childhood wasn't an easy one. With little money, my family couldn't afford even the most basic education. But my mother always encouraged me to learn, telling me that knowledge would be my only true wealth. Despite the odds, I taught myself to read and write, and that would shape the rest of my life in ways I could never have imagined. When I was in my teens, fate dealt me another blow. My mother passed away as well. I was left with no family and had to fend for myself. But adversity never broke me. At 19, I left my home and moved to Greenville, Tennessee, where I began my career as a carpenter. You could say that my life was always tied to hard labor and struggle. But it was in those years that I learned resilience. And it was here that I developed a deep empathy for the struggles of the working class. It was also here that I first became involved in politics. I may have been just an ordinary carpenter at the time, but I felt a strong calling to public service. I was elected to the town council and then to the Tennessee state legislature. While I didn't come from a privileged background, I believed with all my heart that anyone, regardless of where they came from, should have the opportunity to make a better life. My political platform resonated with the working class, and I fought for their rights, believing the government should be a voice for the common people. My journey in politics was far from easy. I was often misunderstood, even criticized as a man willing to take any means necessary to achieve his ends. But no matter what, I stood by the people. My beliefs never wavered. And in 1864, against all odds, I found myself in the highest office of the land, becoming the President of the United States. What followed were some of the most trying days in American history, as I faced the daunting task of rebuilding a nation torn apart by civil war. My decisions during the Reconstruction era would define my presidency, and my actions, sometimes controversial, would echo through history. As I look back on those days, I often wonder, what was it that propelled an ordinary man like me to the center of the stage in history? And what kind of fate brought me to a position where every decision I made would affect the future of this country? Today, I'll share my story with you, hoping you'll see a different side of American history, one that shows how a man, in the face of tremendous adversity, held fast to his beliefs and faced each challenge with courage. I was born in 1808 in a small town in North Carolina. My father was a poor carpenter, and he passed away when I was very young. My mother, without any financial support, raised me alone. Life was tough, and poverty was my constant companion. I remember that during those early years, we could hardly afford even the most basic food, but my mother always believed that education was the key to changing our lives. That I had little access to formal schooling growing up, and there were few educational opportunities for children like me. But my mother read to me, and she taught me the basics of reading and writing. I didn't attend a regular school like other children. Most of what I learned was through self-study at home. This taught me an important lesson. No matter how poor life made me, knowledge was something I could control and rely on. When I was in my teenage years, I began to work around town. Even then, life didn't get any easier. But it was during this time that I met a man who would change the course of my life. He was a local carpenter, and he gave me some encouragement. He told me that being a carpenter, though not an exalted profession, could provide a decent life if done well. So, I decided to follow that path, and my career as a carpenter began. The work was hard, but it taught me a lot about craftsmanship and responsibility. Through these years, I learned the true value of hard labor. It was also during this time that I came to understand the importance of working with others and the necessity of fighting for better opportunities. Though life was harsh, I found fulfillment in the work I did, and I knew that if I continued to push forward, I could improve my circumstances. But challenges kept coming. When I was 16, my mother passed away after a long illness. That moment felt like the world had become even colder and lonelier. I was an orphan now, left to fend for myself. I still remember the last words my mother spoke to me, urging me never to give up on the hope of a better life. Those words stayed with me, and they only strengthened my resolve to change my destiny. After her passing, I made the decision to leave my home and move to Greenville, Tennessee. Though the town was still poor, I believed that it offered a fresh start, a place where new opportunities might arise. When I first arrived, I had nothing to my name, but I was filled with hope. I took up carpentry here and began working hard, slowly putting down roots in this new community. It was in Greenville that I first became involved in politics. I realized that, while local government might seem small, it had a direct impact on the lives of ordinary people. Slowly, I began to take an interest in public affairs and decided that if I wanted to make a real difference, I needed to step onto the political stage. This was the beginning of my political journey. After settling in Greenville and working as a carpenter, I began to realize that while the town was small, it held great potential for change. As an ordinary tradesman, my life was closely tied to the community around me. I wasn't just a carpenter. I was a working-class citizen, and I knew firsthand the struggles people were facing. During this time, I started to get involved in local politics. I began attending town meetings and became more aware of how local government decisions were affecting the lives of ordinary people. I quickly noticed that many of the political choices seemed to serve the interests of the wealthy few, while overlooking the needs of the majority. This sparked something in me. I realized that my voice and the effort of someone like me could bring about real change. So, I decided to dive into local politics. My first step was running for a seat on the Greenville Town Council. At the time, many thought it was unlikely that a humble carpenter would be able to make a difference in local politics. But I believed that even ordinary people could have an impact. My platform was simple. Government should not exist only to serve the wealthy, but should work for the well-being of every citizen. I became active on the town council, proposing policies that aimed to reduce taxes for the poor, improve the education system, and secure better working conditions for laborers. These proposals resonated with many working-class people, but they also faced resistance from the wealthy elites. They saw me as a threat to their power and influence, but I refused to back down. In the town council, my efforts began to gain traction. Though my voice wasn't immediately welcomed by everyone, I built enough support to earn the trust of the common people. More and more citizens recognized that I was fighting for them, and my political philosophy gained wider acceptance. This would lay the foundation for my future political career. As my influence grew, I set my sights on a larger stage. I ran for a seat in the Tennessee state legislature and won. Once in the state legislature, I realized I could push for reforms on a broader scale, aiming to improve the lives of more people. My position remained the same. I fought for the working class people, especially those who were impoverished and oppressed. In the legislature, my debates with other politicians became more heated. I stood firm with the laboring masses, advocating for reform and opposing exploitation and inequality. However, I also came to understand that politics isn't just about winning arguments or fighting for ideals. It's about navigating complex compromises and maintaining your principles. I had to balance my convictions with the political realities of the time in order to effectively secure the rights and welfare of the people. Over time, my ideas began to gain significant traction in Tennessee. As a state legislator, I pushed forward many proposals related to education, workers' rights, and tax reform, with a focus on helping the most vulnerable. These efforts not only earned me more support within the state, but also made me a potential figure on the national political stage. After serving as a state legislator in Tennessee, I began to realize that while I had achieved some success in state-level politics, my ambitions reached beyond that. I believe that only by stepping onto a larger political stage could I truly push for change and make a difference on a national level. At the time, the United States was in the throes of the Civil War, a nation deeply divided, with tensions between the North and South at an all-time high. The shadow of war hung over the country, and the task of rebuilding and healing the nation became more urgent than ever. It was during this period that my name started to appear more frequently on the national political radar. In 1864, I was selected as the vice presidential candidate alongside President Abraham Lincoln. At this point, I was not yet a household name across the country, but my unwavering support for the Union and my advocacy for Lincoln's policies, particularly my influence in Tennessee, made me an appealing choice for the ticket that Lincoln's decision to choose me was not without thought. He understood that, in a nation torn apart by war, it was crucial to find a candidate who could appeal to the southern states and help unite the nation. I was someone who could bridge the gap between the North and South. While my political views often differed from those of many in the North, like Lincoln, I was dedicated to preserving the Union and ending the Civil War. That my political platform at the time was clear and focused. I wanted to ensure the protection of the working class, push for economic recovery, and advocate for the rights of Southerners in the post-war Reconstruction. To many, I represented the voice of Southern workers and acted as a bridge to the Northern supporters of the Union. My selection as vice presidential candidate was significant in the context of the nation's division that in November 1864, Lincoln and I won the election. Though we faced overwhelming challenges, I was confident in our victory. As vice president, I would have additional responsibilities, especially in the process of rebuilding the nation and helping to restore the Union. At the time, I did not realize that this position would not only bring me to the national forefront of politics, but would also set me up for a much more complex and difficult journey. My tenure as vice president began relatively smoothly. My main duties were to participate in the Senate's proceedings and work closely with the president on the issues of Reconstruction. Though my role did not carry the same prominence as the president's, I understood that this position gave me significant political influence and paved the way for the critical decisions that would come. April 14th, 1865, was a day I will never forget. That day, President Lincoln was assassinated in Washington, D.C. When I received the news, it felt as if the entire world had come crashing down. In that moment, an unexpected fate suddenly fell upon me. I, Andrew Johnson, became the 17th President of the United States. At the time, the country was in the midst of a critical transition. The Civil War had ended, but the scars of the conflict were still deeply embedded in the nation. The southern states were in ruins, their economies shattered, and their social order nearly destroyed. The most pressing issue was how to reintegrate these states into the Union and how to rebuild the shattered social and economic systems of the South. From my very first day as president, I realized that this was no simple transition. The United States stood at a crossroads, and Reconstruction was not just about restoring the economy. It was about restoring the spirit of national unity. As president, I had an enormous responsibility, not only to heal the South, but also to restore trust in the North and ensure harmony across the entire nation. That my Reconstruction plan began with the readmission of the Southern states. My goal was to restore them to the Union quickly, without overly complicated procedures or harsh demands. This approach was similar to Lincoln's. I believed in a lenient, forgiving policy to promote reconciliation. For those Southern leaders who had been loyal to the Union, I was willing to grant them amnesty, allowing them to rejoin the Union under certain conditions. However, as I implemented this policy, I faced strong opposition from Congress. Many members, especially from the Northern radical factions, felt that my Reconstruction plan was too lenient. They called for harsher punishments for the South and wanted to impose strict conditions on the return of Southern states to the Union. They feared that my leniency would lead to further division and that the legacy of slavery might continue to influence the nation's future. The conflict between Congress and me grew more intense, particularly as I moved forward with my more lenient Reconstruction measures. While my policies were aimed at reconciliation, many of the radical Republicans believed I was too forgiving of the Southern slave-owning class, and they felt I was not doing enough to support the newly freed Black Americans. Matters worsened when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and I vetoed it, arguing that it infringed upon the rights of states. This opposition soon escalated into a full-blown confrontation between Congress and myself. I firmly believed that the nation needed mercy and reconciliation, but Congress saw it differently. They believed I was neglecting civil rights and began to actively work against my policies. I began to realize that even though I held the presidency, without cooperation from Congress, many of my Reconstruction plans would not succeed. At the same time, my personal style and decision-making approach began to alienate many people. My unwavering and direct manner often led to clashes with Congress. I was unwilling to cater to the radical faction and instead stuck to my principles of reconciliation and forgiveness. While my stance was grounded in what I believed to be best for the nation, it also brought unprecedented challenges to my leadership. As I continued to implement my Reconstruction policies, the conflict between myself and Congress grew increasingly severe. Congress, especially the radical Republicans, was angered by my lenient approach. They believed I wasn't doing enough to advance civil rights, particularly in securing freedom and equality for African Americans. I maintained that both white and black Southerners needed to be reintegrated into the nation through a policy of forgiveness and leniency, while the radicals argued for a much tougher approach to ensure fundamental social change. The tension between us became irreconcilable, and in 1867, Congress passed the Reconstruction Acts, which set much stricter requirements for the Southern states. They required Southern states to draft new state constitutions and guarantee voting rights for black men. I strongly opposed this legislation, believing it infringed upon the sovereignty of the Southern states and would deepen the national division. My opposition only intensified the confrontation with Congress. At this point, they began to take steps to curtail my presidential powers. The most significant of these measures was the passage of the Tenure of Office Act in 1867, which stated that the president could not remove cabinet members without Senate approval. This act was clearly aimed at limiting my power, particularly after my disagreements with several members of my cabinet. In 1868, after I dismissed my Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was opposed to my Reconstruction policies, Congress decided to take decisive action. They argued that I had violated the Tenure of Office Act and began proceedings for impeachment. The immediate cause of the impeachment was my dismissal of Stanton, which was seen as a direct challenge to the authority of Congress. Although I believed I, as president, had the constitutional right to control my cabinet, Congress viewed my action as an overreach of executive power. The impeachment process was set in motion, and the political atmosphere in the country became incredibly tense. Facing impeachment, my emotions were conflicted. On one hand, I believed I was doing what was right for the country, sticking to my principles. On the other hand, I knew that if impeachment succeeded, it would mark the end of my political career. My supporters rallied against the impeachment, but the opposition in Congress was formidable, and soon the case was brought before the Senate for trial. In May 1868, the Senate held an impeachment trial. Though I had some supporters who defended my actions, the final vote was incredibly close. I narrowly avoided conviction, with the Senate falling just one vote short of removing me from office. This political storm made me acutely aware of how difficult it was to maintain the presidency when facing such intense opposition. Although I survived the impeachment crisis in 1868, my political career never returned to the calm it once had. While I managed to remain in office, my relationship with Congress was irreparably damaged, and my policies struggled to gain any real traction. Many saw my survival after impeachment as a temporary victory, but it did not change the immense challenges I continued to face. From that point forward, my presidency became increasingly isolated. Congress continued to push forward with its own agenda, while I seemed powerless to respond effectively. Despite my attempts to maintain my policies and push for key reforms, such as my proposed plans for Southern Reconstruction and civil rights, I faced relentless opposition. Congress not only refused to cooperate, but also directly challenged my positions on many issues. My style of governance, which emphasized leniency and reconciliation, particularly toward the South, was idealistic in a post-war America that demanded more immediate, radical change. I believe that only through forgiveness and constructive dialogue could true national healing take place. However, the radical Republicans in Congress were adamant that the South could only be fully reconstructed through harsh measures, ensuring the complete elimination of slavery's influence. This fundamental disagreement placed me in constant political conflict during my final years in office. Despite this, I maintained a certain level of support, particularly in the South, where those who still believed in my policy of leniency held out hope that I could provide some form of redemption for the region. Unfortunately, my policies were often blocked, and many of my proposals were left unfulfilled due to congressional resistance. When my presidency came to an end, my legacy remained a subject of intense debate. Supporters believed that I offered a more forgiving, peaceful path to Reconstruction, which they argued spared the South from the harsh consequences imposed by the radical Republicans. Critics, however, felt that I was too weak in addressing civil rights and social reform, leaving deep-rooted issues of inequality unresolved that in the end, my political legacy is complex. I contributed to the restoration of the nation after the Civil War, but the road I chose was filled with division and strife. My policies of leniency didn't fully take hold, yet they provided a foundation for future political leaders on how to navigate the complexities of reconciliation in a divided nation. After leaving office, my influence in national politics waned significantly. I returned to local politics and attempted to run for the Senate, but I was unsuccessful. When I passed away, I remained active in the political scene, but my life had also witnessed the arrival of a new political era. After leaving the presidency, I did not completely fade from the public eye. I returned to my home in Tennessee, attempting to live a quieter life. Despite no longer holding office, I remained interested in politics. My life was not entirely free of political struggles. I continued to keep a watchful eye on national affairs and, a few years later, even tried to return to the political stage. In 1869, I decided to run for a seat in the Senate, hoping to re-enter the halls of Congress and influence the country's direction once again. Though I had been president, my campaign did not gain much support. Many in Congress and the public felt that my presidency, marked by conflict with Congress, had eroded their trust in me. Despite putting forth a great deal of effort, I was ultimately unsuccessful in my bid. This defeat was a clear signal to me that my political career had come to an end. Nevertheless, my life in Tennessee was relatively peaceful. My family life was filled with warmth and comfort, and although I remained a controversial figure, I spent much of my time with loved ones. My wife, Eliza, and I shared these years together, and our relationship remained strong by the time of my death. I was still considered a complex and contentious figure. My political career had been full of challenges, confrontations, and deeply divisive issues. Yet I held steadfast to my belief in reconciliation and leniency toward the South, despite criticism for not being more forceful in addressing the legacy of slavery. After my passing, my historical legacy experienced fluctuations. Historians' opinions of me are sharply divided. Many argue that my failures as president, especially my inability to work with Congress and push through meaningful reforms, left the country without the transformation it needed. My lenient policies, particularly toward African Americans, were viewed as a failure to secure civil rights, and my inability to confront the lingering issues of slavery was seen as a lost opportunity. However, others believe my approach helped avoid harsher punishments for the South and laid the groundwork for America's future. Though my place in history has not always been viewed favorably, I did contribute to the nation's recovery. I truly believe that leniency and reconciliation were the best paths to rebuilding the country, not retribution and punishment. I fought for this vision, and though my path was controversial, it reflected the core of my political convictions throughout my life.